So welcome everybody to the Green Dialogue, and welcome our guest speaker, Mark Sullivan, today. Mark is the creative director and curator for the MSU Collab studio, and some of you remember Carolyn White joined us last month to talk about their 1.5 degree Celsius exhibit. There's a new exhibit related to some of our conversations coming up, and Mark has put out a request for proposals, and he'll talk to us more about that. And then we'll have some time for open dialogue, Q&A. I'm sure does anyone have any breaking updates they want to share before we get started? Otherwise, Mark, thanks for joining us. We've known each other for probably 20 years or more. Our kids went to Montessori together, and you might have been on the board as well, Mark. But anyway, tell us more about yourself.
It's been a while. So thanks, first of all, for allowing me to talk to you all. I can get into why I'm interested in talking to you as we go along, but maybe it might be helpful too to provide a little bit of background, not only about me, but about some things that have been going on with the MSU Museum and this particular project. I've been in the East Lansing area even longer than Leroy was suggesting. I think I've been here about at least 37 years. And we actually met through our children's connections in preschool, which seems like ancient history by now. But most of the time I was here until about 2 decades ago. I worked as a composer and helped develop the computer music studio at MSU. And over the past couple of decades, I've become more and more involved in educational projects that touch on technology and various kinds of social issues, particularly social issues that seem to touch lots of people and that are not just local, but also global. So about 5 years ago, I had a chance to become part of a project that started in Detroit called Science Gallery, which was an informal education project looking at science and art. And it was not a traditional art museum. It also wasn't a traditional science museum. We didn't have hardly anything hanging on the wall to just look at, and also not much under glass cases. And we used lots of gaming formats and video and so forth. And this project was aimed primarily at 18 to 25-year-olds. And it was part of our being the core group of people who envisioned this, part of our analysis of what's going on in the world and the need to open up art and science to people who think it's not for them, and also provide ways for people to explore scientific thought, environmental thought, technology, and so forth, and bring that to bear on solving serious and urgent social problems. So jumping forward a bit, about 2 years ago, the provost at MSU said, well, you know, this museum, which has been a natural history museum, has gone through some pretty rough times. They've had about 5 directors in 7 years. They haven't had any resources. They're underfunded. The staff are demoralized. And we would like to merge this Science Gallery project with a new project. And we want you to re-envision this museum. And we also want you to re-envision its relationship to the university and the community. So we spent a year coming up with a 5-year plan. And one aspect of that plan is to get the museum out of the museum into the community. And there's a parallel to that, which involves getting the community into the museum. And so we're spending a lot of time to try and build on past relationships or revive them, and also create new ones that open up areas of exhibition that are not part of traditional museum activities, including natural history museums. And it's not going to be a natural history museum anymore. It's going to retain the focus on 18 to 25-year-olds, but it will not focus quite as much on K-12. We think the museum in Lansing does a really good job of that, and we see that as sort of a duplication of effort. So we really want to focus on college students. It is a university museum and the community around it. So compressing things a bit more, we just finished an exhibition on climate change and global warming. And one of the reasons we did that exhibition was that we wanted to respond to the urgency of the situation, which we felt we had a responsibility to emphasize. We did not want to seem to be in a position where we were comfortable with business as usual. We wanted to catalyze more commitment from the public, from the university, and from ourselves, actually. At the same time, we also didn't want to paralyze people. And in one of my conversations leading up to that exhibition with a person in Detroit who had worked with Buckminster Fuller's World Game for 20 years, at some point he said to me, you know, Mr. Sullivan, I understand what you're talking about, but it's too late. Really, the best we can do is to prepare to get through the coming dark ages. And I told him, Dwayne, I understand why you're saying that. And I can't prove that you're wrong. And I know that you might be right, but I do think there are some things still within the realm of human agency that we can do. And if we don't do those, we'll never know if we could have intervened and prevented the worst aspects of catastrophe. So that balancing act between trying to make people aware that there are things they can do and that there are new things coming around that could create some kind of realistic hope, coupled with an ever intensifying urgency, was what we wanted to achieve in that exhibit. And I think to some extent we did that. And one thing that maybe touches on your group here, just as an example, we had a group from, actually they were from Vermont originally, but they've recently relocated to California. They created an exhibit, and most of our exhibits, as I said, are not under glass. So this was like 30 feet of huge boxes painted different colors to show how much carbon a typical American person uses in different kinds of activity in the course of a week. And they also had some things which I'll explain in a second, but so, and I'm not a museum person. So until 5 years ago, I did not create shows and I wasn't a curator, and this whole arena is kind of new to me, but it's also part of what we wanted. We're trying to do this in an interdisciplinary way. And this team is also kind of an example of that, in that they didn't start off creating exhibits for museums. They were environmentalists, some of them were designers, some of them were farmers. And so their project was called Our Carbon. And over the course of 3 years, what they initially started off doing was challenging the concept of human waste, and literally human waste. So they started looking at whether or not human bio waste could be repurposed and used in productive ways. And they knew already that it could be used to make fertilizer, but they wanted to look for other things. So the first product they came up with was a kind of ink. It's has none of the environmental toxins of traditional India inks, and it's also really durable and thick. So they found a lot of uses for that, but they were approached by some people who were interested in alternative clothing production. And so they found a way to convert the ink into tints and dyes for clothing, and produced a whole line over the course of a year, a whole line of alternative jackets and shirts using these tints and inks, which eliminated all kinds of really toxic chemicals that were used in the fashion world to produce the kind of clothing that they were producing. And then about a month before our exhibition opened, they sent us a note and said, hey, we've got a new angle. We just met with some people in the construction industry, and it turns out that our pellets, which are human bio waste that have been subjected to these incredible temperatures that take all the impurities and the forever chemicals out of them, and we put some of our pellets in regular old everyday concrete, and it produces this ultra strong concrete that can be used in the most challenging building and architecture practices. And now all these construction companies want to use our concrete, so we're going to start producing it and make it available. So all of these things were part of this one exhibit. It took up, 10 square feet in the exhibit, and was about both the process they went through to develop these products and about challenging the notion of waste. And so all of our exhibits have some of that flavor. Like one of them was about a woman from Portland who's developed clinics for bees. And they're actually clinics for people. So to teach people how to take care of bees and to understand that you can intervene. You don't have to just sit back and watch bees vanish. There are concrete steps you can take, even as a layperson, to help prevent bees from being eradicated, et cetera, et cetera. So, as you probably know, from going to museums have a tendency to focus on something for a while and then move to something else. So unfortunately, we did not end climate change and global warming by March 1st. I had high hopes, but everyone I mentioned them to laughed at me, and it was somewhat tongue-in-cheek. But one thing that we decided as a group was that we wanted to have a kind of cyclic nature to our presentation. So we don't want to completely forget about global warming and climate change. We are going to turn to food and food deserts and food emergencies and food and social identity, but we realize there's a connection to global warming and climate change. And so we're hoping over time that we'll have a reflective aspect to what we're doing too. And also maybe it's a sneaky attempt to focus at environmental issues for 3 years instead of 1 year, because we have different areas of emphasis. So essentially, after this year, we're also going to look at mobility and migration and so forth, which also has implications for land use and food. So in a way, we're setting this up so that we can focus at least 3 years, and we're actually hoping for 5, on this complex, interconnected set of problems, which I assume from your name, you all have been thinking about too. So the way that I put in the chat the open call. Basically, the open call is sort of our statement of the themes that we would like to address in the exhibit. And our exhibitors are all over the block. We've had groups of college students, researchers, research artists, farmers, technologists, people working in industry, and the exhibits themselves are also all over the place. Joan Rose did an exhibit. We did a exhibition on water. She's an endowed professor of water at MSU and won the Stockholm Prize, but she did a thing on water in Michigan, water in the United States, and water in the world. And it was kind of a mixture of data visualization and a simple survey, asking people what they knew about water. And it showed the cumulative results as the season went forward. So we had another piece that was created by 2 musicians from California, which essentially was to provide people the experience of sitting at the bottom of a pond and hearing what they would hear if they were underwater. And these are just some examples of the kind of thing that we wanted to do. We have had many examples. We had a group of indigenous youth from Detroit who did a series of workshops. So we don't just do exhibits, we have what we call programming, which could be a performance, could be a workshop, could be a panel talk. Some of those are one night only. Sometimes they are a series. This particular one was a series, so they had like a women's prayer bowl ceremony that they did singing. Then they did a workshop on electronic music. Then they had this huge performance, which was kind of a mixture of electronic music, traditional Anishinaabe music, stand-up comedy, and audience participation. It was wild. Being my age, I never imagined participating in anything like that because they were all like, 30 to 40, some even younger. And I was way out of my comfort zone, but it was extremely fascinating and not the kind of thing that I've ever seen done by any museum. So maybe I'll rein in my talking for the moment and give you a chance to ask questions or respond. We have about 2 more weeks for proposals, and like I said, proposals can come from anyone. They can come from community members, they can come from research people, we often work with people to help mentor them. People will come and say, I've got an idea, but I've never made an exhibit before. Can you find some people who can help me do that? And we have a design team that we work with that do incredible things in terms of building out the physical space or finding ways to turn the idea into a concrete reality. And so if you have an idea that you want to explore, but you're not quite sure how to do it, that doesn't mean you can't submit a proposal. It just means you need to make clear what you want to do and how far you think you can go and what kind of help you might need. And we could do some of that beforehand too. So I'm willing to meet with people either as groups or one-on-one, or if you want to funnel things through Leroy, that's fine too. But let me pause because I was talking a whole lot.
That was fascinating, and I'm sure you'll find some resonance here. And I'm going to stop talking too, but I just want to briefly mention that this Saturday we're having several exhibitors at the Meridian Mall Farmers Market. And one of our ongoing challenges is how do we design a exhibit or a table that's interactive and engages people and leaves them with positive, uplifting, inspiring thoughts to take home or take to work or what have you. So at some point, it'd be cool to partner on thinking about those exhibits. And we've got a couple of green fairs this fall, and not just doing our own, but maybe helping other people have more interactive and educational experiences at the farmers market.
Yeah, that sounds fascinating. And actually, Caroline, who visited a few weeks ago, our next exhibit is going to be a Smithsonian traveling exhibit called Knowing Nature, the Boreal Forest, which you may know what that is. I didn't. I had to look it up. And it's basically the 5th largest ecosystem on Earth. And it's the forest sort of subarctic that goes from Norway all the way to China, across Canada. And there are little bits and pieces of it in the UP and in the Thumb across from Traverse City in Michigan. And so they've never allowed this exhibit to travel before. So MSU is going to be the first place to host it. And as part of that, Caroline has got a group of 5 students that we are giving a couple of $1,000s each to work for a year to create a game around the experience of this, which if it works out, Smithsonian said if it's good, they'll let it travel with the exhibit the rest of the places it's going to. But for us, it's an experiment of doing just what you were saying, like how can you create something around the experience people are having that changes it and gets them into it in certain ways. So it's not necessarily a computer game. It could be an experiential game. And we're super interested in doing that, not just for games that could be done in a museum context, but to do something, for instance, in the community, in a farmer's market, or in a public space. And, even independently of this particular open call and so forth, we'd love to have some conversations about ways to do that. And we're also starting to find there are some people in MSU who share that interest. So there's a whole division in ComArts called, it's the Gel Lab. And they've developed some computer games that are just really fascinating and don't have anything to do with shooting things up or stealing cars. I mean, one of them that we had in our exhibit was created by a Anishinaabe author, and it was a virtual reality presentation, and people inside the virtual reality identified certain things. And if they collected enough tokens from the environment, it opened up a beautiful drawing of an Anishinaabe constellation made by an Anishinaabe artist. And there were like 12 moments where the sky would unfold, and, instead of seeing the great constellation, you see an Anishinaabe one. And it was fascinating. And I didn't even know that there's a whole thing called indigenous gaming. And there are some people at MSU who've been working with that, and they're looking for opportunities to partner with people in the community to create games that touch on things that people in the community think are important, and to find ways to create those games that draw people in who are interested in gaming but might not know anything about the subject.
That's awesome.
Oh.
What other questions or comments do people have?
So I'm just so excited that you're here and that you're here to be able to tell us all about this. I went to the exhibit, the 1.5, and it was fabulous. So I was really excited to see that. My art professor was a huge, like, all of the art that he created was based off of Buckminster Fuller. So that's really cool. I also worked for a traveling art exhibition company right out of college. And so that is awesome. I was hoping, when Carolyn was here, hoping that you would consider traveling the 1.5, but I know that it's from all different places. So that makes it hard.
Yeah, we wanted to. We had two people who were going to show it, but it all fell through because of COVID.
Yeah. Well, it would be, even if you could do it in the state, it would be really cool to be able to get it to a few places. So this is just exciting. So I appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. And if you don't mind, I might touch base with you down the road, because figuring out how to get things traveling is something we'd like to do. The museum used to have a traveling exhibit program, and it's sort of atrophied. And so we have to build it back from scratch. And another thing that we're doing that might fit into what you were talking about, this fall, we're going to launch something we're calling a rapid residency. And so the first round is going to involve indigenous creators. And we're going to we'll probably give 2 $5,000 commissions to an indigenous creative maker. I'm avoiding saying artist because we're not limiting it to traditional art forms, to create a piece based on something in the collection. And so a lot of those things would be the sort of thing that we would want to travel. Like, we'd love to go to the community where these indigenous artists are based and have it appear there too, not just at MSU. So you might have some ideas about that, and I'd love to talk to you further about it sometime.
Sure. Sounds good. I also really appreciate the age focus. There's so much focus oftentimes on K-12. So I think it's really cool to put the focus on the young adults.
Yeah, and speaking of Fuller, there's actually a reason for that, and it relates to the fact that we think that by 2050, if we want to have a democratically engaged and technologically informed population globally, we have to create the teachers now. And that means that the current so-called STEM pipeline is hopelessly inadequate. And we really need to get lots and lots of young people who think that science isn't for them, and art isn't for them, and technology isn't for them, involved and ready to respond to the problems that the world will face in 2050, particularly as they mature and with younger generations. So that's part of why we're focused on the 18 to 25. It's not just arbitrary, but like you said, we do feel there's quite a bit of emphasis on K-12, and actually most museums do a horrible job with 18 to 25. Actually, all cultural institutions, their programming for 18 to 25, ours too, is often underattended. It doesn't engage them in enduring, sustainable ways. And by and large, it's not very effective. So we decided it's time to change that. And we'll see if we make it. It's not easy.
As someone who visited the museum in the 60s, and it's amazing the transformation just you've made in the last few years, and very exciting.
Thank you. It's got a ways to go. My director is always telling me, like, be patient, be patient. And that's not something that comes easy to me. So I'm like, we need to be doing this now. And he's like, well, maybe in 5 years. So that's the sort of the difference between my time frame and maybe a more practical, prudent time frame. Any other questions?
I just want to just say one other thing, that the creative process and engaging youth, it seems like that, having spent 40 plus years talking about sustainability and telling people the list of things that they should do, that's stifles a lot of creativity. And I think people coming up with new solutions and using the creative process just seems like such an important ingredient to sustainability.
Mm-hmm.
So
actually, when I was thinking about speaking to you all this morning, it occurred to me that I might encourage you too to think about yourselves, because one aspect of this call has to do with hoping that people start to think about their relationship with food and food growing practices and the environment in which food is created, and of course how it's connected to power and things like that, inequality. But we're particularly interested in showing people things that stimulate them to think about how people try to get agency. So the fact that you've created this group that's focused on the themes that you're focusing on and that you're trying to influence your environment is something that to me could be a really fascinating, either an aspect of an exhibit or a whole exhibit, because not everybody thinks about that. And for some people, there might be one of these aha moments where it's like, oh, wow, we could do that in our community. Or we could, sometimes talking to students in RISE, which is the Residential Initiative in Sustainable Environments, in one of the dorms, kids from the other dorms go over there and they're like, oh, you have a hoop garden? You have an apiary? We could do that. We got land out behind our dorm. And so, I've seen that kind of thing happen. And sometimes people overlook the importance of their own action. And they think they have to be either a luminary figure in a field or an expert, or somehow have a really, hot, glitzy presentation. But some of the things that we're doing involve people thinking through stuff that they're doing that could have an impact and presenting it to people in ways that get them to think about it. And so I would encourage you to actually think about your organization as a potential model for something. It doesn't have to be the whole organization. There might be a part of what you're doing that you want to emphasize. Since I don't know enough, I can't really make specific suggestions, but I would say that those kinds of things certainly are welcome and wouldn't be ruled out. And if you had an idea that went that direction, it would certainly be taken seriously.
Awesome. We do have a question here on the phone. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Roberta, and
Hello.
I'm hearing you. Thank you for your effort. This is wonderful. I'm hearing you talking about creating exhibits, and I am encouraging you to consider. I happen to be not anywhere near 18 to 25, but I am blind, and I encourage you to, as you are creating, as opposed to a retrofit, to consider opportunities to make materials accessible to people who are blind, either tactily or on a computer with alt text, for graphics, other things like that, descriptions. I'm always willing to be a guinea pig.
Great. That's definitely a concern and one that we return to consistently. And actually, we're not very satisfied yet with our efforts across the whole board to provide. I mean, we've done some things, but we got a long way to go with that. And also, there is a component. I don't know if you ever ran across the work of Daniel Kish, but he is a person who was blind since early in life, I think the 4th week. And when he was a teenager, he taught himself how to echolocate. And so he now goes around the world teaching blind people to echolocate. But recently he worked with a neurophysiologist who did some work and demonstrated, so he can also teach sighted people how to echolocate. And it turns out that sighted people and people who are blinded later in life, like in their late teens, when they do MRI on them while they're echolocating, it's doing what you would expect, which is stimulating the audio cortex. But with Daniel Kish and blind people who were blinded before their late teens, there's been a transfer of function, and it is actually processed in the visual cortex. And neurophysiologists did not know that. And so it's opened up a whole vein of research. So we're particularly interested in not only in making accessible what we're offering, but even finding ways for other abled people to create experiences that might go beyond what people usually think of as accessibility. Like, for instance, talking to one of these neurophysiologists, he said, we don't know what we look like from behind. And so my question to him was, do you think there's a way to create an experience for a sighted person so that they would understand blindness as something other than not being able to see? This partly came out of there's a TED Talk by a woman who is functionally deaf. Her name is Evelyn Gwenny. She's a percussionist and plays at a virtuoso level with orchestras all over the world. She plays barefoot, and she says that she feels the vibration of music through her feet and on the hairs of her arm. And at one point in her talk, she says, I was interviewing for the Royal Conservatory of Music in London, and the guy said, excuse me, I may seem like a Luddite, but why are you applying for a school of music if you're deaf? And her answer is something like, well, you're probably one of those people who think that being deaf is like when you plug up your ears, or being blind is like when you close your eyes, and it's not like that. And of course, I felt kind of implicated because I thought, well, I probably would have been just like that guy, and wondered, so then I started to wonder, how could I conceptualize blindness if I had never seen? How could I conceptualize deafness if I had never heard? And could somebody who hears or somebody who sees understand something of that experience? So we're super interested in this subject as, also a thematic area to investigate. And we'd love to find ways to do that. Like, my director went to an exhibition in Memphis, and the whole room was dark. And the only way you could navigate through it was by listening to water dripping. And you had to avoid the water, but it was like a maze. But the whole thing was an oral experience, and you could not use your eyes at all. And so things like that are definitely up our alley. And if you have ideas that go that direction, we'd welcome them.
That's great. I'm not surprised to hear that they finally figured out that the occipital lobe is where much of the mobility and orientation plasticity occurs in the brain for people who lose their vision or who never had it. I read recently, and I thought, I've been blind for a long, long time, but I heard a quote which I thought was absolutely spoke to the whole thing that you are talking about with a woman who's deaf. People, and don't feel bad that you thought it was like plugging your ears or closing your eyes. That's very typical and very normal. The quote is, those people who lose their vision or other sense, their senses don't become more acute, they become more eloquent. So in other words, everything that woman was using is available to anyone. It just has to do with what you pay attention to.
That's a beautiful
I
quote.
applaud you for your efforts. That's wonderful.
That's an awesome formulation. I will remember that. I like it.
Great. I love that.
Also, just maybe to go back to this open call there. So what we're focused on is not just food production. And I mentioned, I think, very quickly that we're also interested in food's relationship to social identity. And also like how people think about food. It seems like such a simple thing, and probably you all have been doing it long enough that you probably are steeped in it. But some of the people that we encounter, if you say something to them about their relationship to food, they kind of look at you like, what do you mean my relationship to food? I eat, and they don't, and I'm not a farmer or whatever. And so like, having gone through some health issues in the past 2 or 3 years that led me to completely reconfigure my relationship to food and my diet and so on and so forth, and finding out that actually I can still eat really good food, and getting involved in creating the food has been beneficial. I've seen a transformation in my own behavior in my own life that's pretty amazing. And I wasn't running out eating steak all the time, ever. But still, I became aware that it is something that's part of your identity. And so when you're trying to change it, you're also interacting with people's identity. And so it's not just a matter of, getting enough resources or the right agricultural practices. And over again, I keep coming back to this and talking to people that this is involved with changing some aspects of people's core beliefs. So recently I was talking to a person from the Netherlands who told me, it's taken us 30 years to convince the farmers to let the water in and to tear down the dikes and let flood some of their fields, because they're not going to keep the water out. They have to change. For 100 years, the idea was to keep the water out, build dikes and so forth. But we realized 40 years ago that was not going to be possible. But it's taken us 30 years to reach the point where they are willing to try things differently. So changing people's core beliefs is also part of what we're after. We're trying to get people to think about their relationship to food, to think about growing and, even the kind of food they eat. Not too long ago, I went to a restaurant in Detroit called Vegan Soul. And I walked in and I was kind of like, holy shit, there's all these hipsters here with African-American people in the kitchen. And like, I ordered collard greens, and I asked the waitress, I was like, are you sure there's not bacon on here? Because it sure tastes like bacon. She's like, no, we don't serve bacon. And I was amazed, because it tasted like the real thing. And I thought, what a crazy idea to put this vegan restaurant right in the middle of this historically African-American community. And not only is it a crazy idea, but it's flourishing.
What other comments or questions, thoughts has Mark inspired? I'm feeling pretty inspired, but what else is on your mind, folks?
There's another aspect to this too, and it's work that I'm doing in the area is environmental justice, and just how all of that food and location and just and what you're talking about with the water coming in Norway and stuff and flooding, and there's just such an environmental injustice aspect to all of this as well. The other comment I wanted to make is, as an artist, I really appreciate what you're doing in terms of, I think about the Broad Museum, and I have heard that they struggle to get visitors in and that kind of thing. And I find this is how, to me, this is just so inspiring to your brain of just all this information of discovery and stuff, and how differently that can be than a typical art museum. Art museum, I love art museums, but also just this inclusionary of this science and tactile and all kinds of different ways of looking at things. And that's oftentimes what my art is all about as well. And so I just think that's really inspiring. So I think it's exciting.
Thank you. Me too. And, one thing I didn't mention was that we have these young people that we hire, and we call them collaborators. They're not docents. They're not there to tell people don't touch things or giving unrequested historical information or whatever. They're actually there to have a dialogue with visitors about their experience and how the exhibits relate to the issues that we hope to address. And we introduce them to the exhibitors before the exhibits ever open. We do workshops for them to help them get up to speed and to show them how to talk to people without being intrusive or being overly didactic and so forth. And to me, they're as important as the actual exhibits. Like, they create an experience that's so different, and it's going exactly the direction that you mentioned. Like, it's really about having an experience, not about processing facts or anything like that. And so I find that exciting, particularly at this stage in my life, to be able to work with these young people. And one of the first people I met who had done this for a couple of years, she was a senior, and she said, Mr. Sullivan, my professor didn't have any idea how to talk about his research to the public. Nothing. I'm the one who learned it. And I figured out how to tell people why the work he was doing is important and how to understand it. And now he's learning from me because I'm showing him how to talk to people. And I was just like, this is beautiful.
I have to mention that we have a food team. Actually, it's called Good Food to Smart Recycling Team. That I think one of their members is here, Tom, who sits in on some of the meetings. They meet a couple times a month and talk about food issues, composting, and I guess I'm thinking of a couple ideas here. But one of the things that got going is we have several self-directed teams that are largely volunteers, kind of inspired about an issue. Bruce is on our green burial team. John Sarver heads up our energy team. Sarah's involved with our green team, and Elaine and Tom are also involved with our green team. But this idea of finding something that inspires you and working together towards those goals is one of the things that makes my job here at the township interesting and inspiring to me. And it's partly dialogue is a piece of that. But I'm just really appreciating how you've touched on a lot of things that have been boiling around in this dialogue and articulated them in ways that make a lot of sense.
Yeah, that sounds great. And just as another example, we talked to the head of Soup Spoon because we had an exhibitor who had created a cuisine with urchins. She actually was working with some urchin farmers in Rhode Island and New Jersey. And the only cuisine they knew of that used urchins very much was Japanese. And most people weren't necessarily gung-ho on Japanese cuisine. So they're like, well, we need to get some chefs and develop some new dishes. So they did. And it turns out that urchins are the most heat resistant of all aquatic creatures. So they also have a leg up on some of the challenges presented by global warming, but they also discovered that if they ground the urchin spines, it could create a really fine quality porcelain. And there was a tint in the urchins they could use for dyeing fabric. So they made napkins and tablecloths. And anyhow, they did an event where they had two 12-course meals created by two master chefs, all with urchin cuisine, including urchin donuts as dessert, on porcelain that was created from urchin spines, and all of the fabric and so forth was dyed by them. And we just thought, wow, can we do that here? And we talked to the guy at Soup Soon, and he's like, absolutely, let's do that. Let's have an evening where we, and we can have some music. So we also have talked several times about having sort of food, music, and photography in an environment for a night. And if there were ideas like that that were attractive, we'd love to partner on them.
You've really blown the lid off of my thought processes. I am on the what we now call the Good Food to Smart Recycling team. We are sponsoring a tour on Monday afternoon at 1 o'clock of the Hammond Farms composting facility down in Diamonddale it's near the corner of Waverly Road and M99. I've been the person receiving the reservations for that, so to speak. And I've got this morning, right before the meeting, there was some interest from a group in Langsburg who want to join us. And I'm not sure, I asked them how many of them are there, and I await their response. So this is something that some of us have shown an interest in. Some of us have done this before, but our group is interested in not landfilling food waste. And what we do is partner with the gleaning project at the farmers market. Not let this food go to waste, but let it go to people first before we end up with food waste that needs to be composted rather than landfill. So quite exciting stuff that's been happening in our community.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. Actually, I just had a conversation yesterday with a woman from Detroit, Renee Wallace. She is the director of a company called Food First, which I think is about 12 years old or so. And they actually gather food that otherwise would be wasted from various sources, restaurants, dumpsters, and so forth. And they have a company that's converting it into energy. So we're hoping that Renee and her group might propose something for this. That was the purpose of our conversation, was to talk about whether their group could come up with one or more presentations. And actually, when I heard her talk about all the stuff they were doing, I was kind of like, you guys could do an exhibition all by yourself. You're doing so many different things, so many amazing things. And so, what you just mentioned is certainly something that we're super interested in. And it's actually really exciting to me to hear how much is going on that I didn't know about. And to also get some more specifics. Like, I have a vague idea that people are doing things, but to know concretely is really inspiring.
We have about 9 more minutes. What other things that could relate to what Mark's talking about, or something unrelated? Open to creative input here.
Yeah, you may have other things that you want to deal with too, so I don't have to hog the whole meeting, but I'd just like to say I really appreciate you all talking to me. And I put my email in the chat and would be glad to follow up with anybody if you want to explore some ideas, or if you have people that might be interested, send them to me. And we can work something out. And if it doesn't work out for this exhibition, we're doing lots of other stuff. So hopefully This could be the first of a number of dialogues, and they might be with the whole group or with subgroups, like you mentioned, teams, and all of that would be super welcome.
Thank you so much for taking the time to join us, Mark. It's sorry it's taken so long to get you here.
No worries. It's been a crazy, actually, the last few months have gotten even crazier, and I thought they couldn't possibly get crazier. So there's always a curve somewhere. But I
Okay.
appreciate it, and I look forward to speaking to any of you at any point. And I will try to keep tabs on what you're doing too, because it sounds super fascinating.
Great.
So,
Join us any Wednesday morning at 9, but no obligation to come back. But if you want to pop in for a few minutes here or there, feel free to join. And sometimes we have guest speakers. Our next speaker is the first Wednesday in April. Ruth Klein-Robach is a water expert at MSU. She's going to join us. And
super.
we have the head of the East Lansing wastewater treatment plant joining us in May. So, and we can have speakers like yourself that show up in the middle of the month as well. So if you have ideas for future speakers, feel free to chime in. And I will share this recording with everyone on this call, except Roberta, I'm not sure if I have your email, if that works for you. Please let me know what that is, and I'll be happy to keep you in the loop.
I will
Any
do
other?
that. You're already on my to-do list to contact you about some other things too. So thank you.
Oh, great. Any other parting comments?
Thank you, Mark, so much.
I have a short update on the green burial activities that I've been part of this last week or so. I did meet with the Land Preservation Advisory Board last Wednesday. They were very receptive. Some of the comments that they were making were concerns about who would be responsible for upkeep and things of that nature. I guess Emma thought that the Parks Department were the ones that were taking care of the green lawn and actually doing the grave digging. And they are really short-staffed, so she was concerned about that. And they recommended that I talk to the Parks Commission, who met last night, and I went and I talked to them last night. And they had some questions and were interested, but I didn't really get the feeling that I made a lot of headway with them. And they also told me that it's now the Department of Public Works that does the grave digging at Green Lawn, and would probably be responsible for upkeep of a green burial site if it was other than Green Lawn. So I still think that Green Lawn and that one open section is our best bet to get something going in our township right now. So at least in the near future. So I'm going to contact the phone number that is listed on the Green Lawn signage and see what happens there. But that's it as far as progress.
Thank you for that update. Very exciting to hear progress, and nice to see your initiative on that. Anything else from anyone? I did want to sort of echo what you said, Mark, about making an experience. Athena was involved with, we had a green fair last summer and interviewing people about their perceptions on the environment. And it struck me, even though she didn't necessarily talk to a huge number of people, she created and shared an experience that people wouldn't get just walking up and picking up a flyer. And I think you're onto something there.
That sounds right on. And in 1.5, we actually spent a month beforehand asking young people what they were concerned about with climate change. And originally we were thinking of getting 6 or 7 quotes. We had about 70 statements, and they were so powerful that everybody was like, we can't choose 6. So we decided to project them on the wall in 4 different places. And we collected them all through the season, and those quotations became a very powerful part of the whole show. So I think, sounds like you were onto this even before we were, and I think there's a lot of potential there. I think
Anything else to wrap this up here?
You're on mute, Athena.
Oh, okay. I was going to say the interesting thing is that people were very spontaneous in talking about things, particularly if they weren't on the spot, because I was recording it and I have a couple of research papers if you were interested in looking at what I found. But more interestingly to me was when people said, turn off the recorder. And then they just started talking about their experiences and their attachment to certain environments and their regrets of moving from one area to another area because of the ecological possibilities and the lack of control, the issue of agency, which you brought up earlier, in terms of creating a pesticide-free environment or their own food or whatever.
Yeah,
So
I'd love to read those.
I'll get a copy to you.
Okay.
Leroy, should I do that, or I'll be glad to send you the copies that I sent.
Or you can send a PDF to that email is fine too.
Sure, I'll do that.
Any way that works is fine with me.
Okay.
Sounds great. I certainly don't feel the gatekeeper of any of this. So go ahead and communicate directly with Mark. Anything else, folks? Otherwise, have a great week and hope to see some of you next week. And please stop out at the Meridian Mall, the J.C. Penney Wing, if you want to check out some interactive exhibits from Amanda, from our Okemos Earth Club. They'll have sustainable fashion, and we'll have loads of literature to provide as well. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.
All right. Thank you all.
Thanks, Mark.
Yep. Ciao.